So there was some information that was quote-unquote leaked by some people from inside Microsoft/OpenAI, and it discusses a plot to build a $100 billion Stargate AI supercomputer. And it seems like this supercomputer is going to power their ambitions of achieving artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Now we can see here that this article clearly states that Microsoft and OpenAI plot to build a $100 billion Stargate AI supercomputer. And essentially this is a radical amount of compute for what they are trying to build. And the details are truly, truly surprising, including some of the recent clips that are circulating all over Twitter. So essentially the number is 100 billion, and it states right here that executives at Microsoft and OpenAI have been drawing up plans for a data center project that would contain a supercomputer with millions of specialized server chips to power OpenAI artificial intelligence. According to a person who spoke to OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman, the project could cost as much as $100 billion. Now this is a giant number, because we know that Microsoft has already committed over $13 billion to OpenAI. So this is pretty incredible. Can you imagine $100 billion being invested into the next system? This actually isn't something that is out of the realm of possibilities, considering Sam Altman recently was talking about $7 trillion for future AI systems, and now we're starting to see that some of these plans are actually beginning to materialize. Now what's crazy about this is that there was literally so much speculation from people in AI community, stating that they've pretty much achieved AGI, and all they're trying to do is get the compute so that they can actually make it reality. And now we're starting to see things like 100 billion worth of compute for their next levels of supercomputers. And the details honestly do get more and more crazy as this goes on, so you definitely should be paying attention. So essentially what they state is that the next 6 years is their entire plan. They basically state that Microsoft would likely be responsible for financing the entire project, which would be $100 billion. It would be many times more costly than some of today's biggest data centers. It says this demonstrates the enormous investment that may be needed to build computing capacity for AI in the coming years. Executives envisage the proposed US-based supercomputer, which they have referred to as Stargate, as the biggest series of installations the companies are looking to build over the next 6 years. So this isn't just one giant supercomputer. There are several phases to this that they are looking to do. And it seems like what they're looking to do with this crazy supercomputer is to build it in several stages, which I'll talk about later. But the crazy thing about this is that all of this would be done allegedly by 2028 or 2030, which is approximately 6 years from now. And that goes to show us that if this timeline is for the next 6 years, this definitely aligns with many people's timelines for AGI/artificial superintelligence, and definitely a key date for the singularity. Because many people have also argued that the moment you get to AGI, the artificial superintelligence isn't far off, because you can just use the AGI to build the ASI, and it's very exponential. Now the article further states that Microsoft's willingness to go ahead with the plan of Stargate depends in part on OpenAI's ability to meaningfully improve the capabilities of its AI. And OpenAI last year failed to deliver a new model it had promised to Microsoft, showing how difficult called the AI frontier can be to predict. So essentially, if you aren't familiar with what they're talking about, previously OpenAI was working on a new model, and this model was actually called Arrakis, and essentially the model didn't work as OpenAI had expected to. And this kind of makes sense because OpenAI, of course, they are scientists and they're trying to see what works and what doesn't. And sometimes things do work and sometimes things do go wrong. So this was something for OpenAI that just didn't go right. The point here is that OpenAI, of course, they need to be able to have something for Microsoft to be able to be like, look, we're going to be investing a certain amount in this. And I think what's rather interesting about this is the fact that if we are taking a look at what we know, now we know that if Microsoft's willingness to go ahead, okay, that means that OpenAI clearly do have something else in the works, which Microsoft have looked at the pitch deck, and they've said, okay, investing $100 billion here does make sense. And I don't think this is just a GPT-5 scale-up. I don't think Microsoft would be willing to invest $100 billion in that, because that doesn't really give them the return on investment they need. But if you think about it like this, they're investing $100 billion because they think in the future they're going to get that money back. And of course, like it says, Microsoft's, willingness to go ahead does depend in part on OpenAI's ability to meaningfully improve the capabilities of its AI, which means that, if OpenAI have something, whatever pitch they use, it definitely means that they have something the Microsoft do believe is going to, bring them a lot more levels of intelligence in terms of what the AI system can do, and of course in terms of what products Microsoft may be able to offer. And in addition to that, it also says here that OpenAI CEO Sam Altman said publicly that the main bottleneck holding up better AI is a lack of sufficient servers to deploy it, and I think that that is something that is rather true. Now, one of the clips that I wanted to show you all was a clip from a podcast in which people from Google and Anthropic were actually discussing about the future models. So you know how this is going to be a $100 billion computer that is going to be powering the next generation of AI systems. This podcast clip essentially discusses that, and they actually talk about how we could be getting AGI by GPT-7.
The framing that given that you have to be 2 orders of magnitude bigger at every generation, if you don't get AGI by GPT-7 that can help you catapult an intelligence explosion, you're kind of just fucked as far as like much smarter intelligences go, and you're kind of stuck with GPT-7 level models for a long time.
GPT-4 cost, I don't know, let's call it $100 million or whatever. You have the 1B run, the 10B run, the 100B run, all seem very plausible by private company standards. You can also imagine even like a 1T run being part of like a national consortium. I want to point out the one we have a lot more jumps. And even if those jumps are relatively smaller, that's still a pretty stark improvement in capability.
Not only that, but if you believe claims that GPT-4 is around 1 trillion parameter count, the human brain is between 30 and 300 trillion synapses. And so that's obviously not a one-to-one mapping, and we can debate the numbers, but it seems pretty plausible that we're below brain scale still.
Even if you can't keep dumping more compute beyond the models that cost $1 trillion or something, the fact that the brain is so much more data efficient implies that if we could train as sample efficient as humans train from birth, we could make the AGI.
Yeah, but the sample efficiency stuff, I never know exactly how to think about it, because obviously a lot of things are hardwired in certain ways, right? The coevolution of language and like the brain structure. So it's hard to say. Also, there are some results that if you make your model bigger, it becomes more sample efficient.
Yeah, and so the original scaling laws paper had that, right?
So maybe that also just solves it.
Now you have to understand that GPT-4 has around 1.8 trillion parameters, and the human brain has around 30 to 300 trillion. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens once we do scale up these models with computer power worth $100 billion. Now, of course, one of the main problems about this is, of course, something that a lot of people don't think about, and that is AI systems actually do require a lot of energy to run. And they talk about Stargate here, stating that if Stargate moves forward, it would produce orders of magnitude more computing power than what Microsoft currently supplies OpenAI from data centers in Phoenix and elsewhere. The people said the proposed supercomputer would also require at least several gigawatts of power, equivalent to what's needed to run at least several large data centers today. Much of the project cost would lie in procuring the chips, and acquiring enough energy to run it could also be a challenge. So powering these supercomputers to achieve AGI is very, very difficult because we need a lot of energy to run these systems. So Microsoft is going nuclear to power its AI ambitions, and it states that Microsoft is looking at next-generation nuclear reactors to power its data centers and AI. Essentially, Microsoft is trying to, invest and try to be at the frontier of next-level energy sources, because if they are, they could power these AI computer systems very, very efficiently, and they would essentially be in the lead by a large margin. And what they also did was they also invested in nuclear fusion. And the crazy thing about this is that nuclear fusion is pretty far away. According to several experts, you can read here from another article that says, experts' optimistic estimates for when the world might see its first nuclear fusion power plant have ranged from the end of the decade to several decades from now. So this is a pretty big bet by Microsoft. Microsoft knows that the energy problem is going to have to be solved to achieve AGI. Microsoft knows that the energy problem is going to have to be solved to achieve AGI. And then, of course, we also have here, which is pretty crazy, and it says the executives have discussed launching Stargate as soon as 2028 and expanding it through 2030, possibly needing as much as 5 gigawatts of power by the end. The people involved in the discussions have said that the key dates of 2028 and 2030 are so incredible because this is where people have predicted that AGI is of course going to come from. And based on a bunch of different articles and a bunch of industry insiders from, Ray Kurzweil, Elon Musk, and Sam Altman himself, they all kind of state that AGI is pretty much going to basically be here by 2028 to 2030. And if we take a look at iterative deployment, considering that OpenAI is likely to release models in this fashion, it seems that, considering they only trademarked up until GPT-7, the next system after that could be an AGI level system, which would be rather fascinating. Now, this article here, they talk about 5 phases. So they said Altman and Microsoft employees have talked about these supercomputers in terms of 5 phases, with phase 5 being Stargate, named for a science fiction film in which scientists develop a device for traveling between galaxies. So there are 5 different phases. Now, phase 4 is actually 2026, so it says the phase prior to Stargate would cost far less. It says Microsoft is working on a smaller phase 4 supercomputer for OpenAI that aims to launch around 2026. Executives have planned to build it in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin, where the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation recently announced that Microsoft broke ground on a $1 billion data center expansion. And apparently, the supercomputer and data center could eventually cost as much as $10 billion to complete. That's many more times than the cost of existing data centers. So it's definitely pretty crazy the amount of investment that is going into compute. Now, this Reddit post that was actually going viral on Twitter is rather fascinating. It says, "It's clear now that OpenAI has much better tech internally and are genuinely scared on releasing it to the public." The Voice Engine blog post stated that the tech is roughly a year and a half old, and they are still not releasing it. And it says the tech is state-of-the-art, 15 seconds of a voice and text input, and the model can sound like anybody in just about every language, and it sounds natural. Microsoft committing $100 billion to a giant data center, for that amount of capital, you need to have seen it, which is AGI with your own eyes. And then the Reddit post says, Sam commented in a recent interview that GPT-4 sucks. Now, it's a very interesting point because that just goes to show that if he thinks these systems suck, that means that, he has clearly seen some level of advanced reasoning and advanced systems that are just clearly ridiculously better than what we have today. And then, of course, the post says, Sam told us that he expects AGI by 2029, but they already have it internally. 5 years for them to talk to government and how to figure out a solution. We are in the end game now. I think $100 billion being committed by Microsoft, if they do fully commit to this, could change the direction of AI completely in the next few years or so. So that's it for today's video. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Project Stargate. See you again next week with another video.